Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast has evolved over the 5+ years since it first launched. From now on, I'm going to be talking about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. And also mindset, of course, but mindset of all kinds, not just business mindset. I think. Things are changing for me, as you may have noticed if you've been following me online or listening to this podcast, so anything goes here. I hope you stay along for the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today, and now let's get into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 358. This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. Today I'm going to talk about how to tell your story. This is a topic that has come up because I've been getting emails from readers of my books and podcast listeners asking me questions about writing their own books. And with some people, I sense a little bit of hesitance. Like some people have had practical questions, but then with some people, I think maybe they're wondering, is my story worth telling? And my answer, of course, is yes, it absolutely is. And I know that because I went through the same process when I worked through my first walking book, which was called Alone on the South Downs Way. And I've just released its second edition, adding the part where I walked the trail for a second time, and I shared just how different that journey was. So despite the fact that I enjoy reading people's books about other people's walking adventures, when I was writing my own book, I wondered if my story was actually worth telling. Thankfully, I did write the book. I did tell my story. Then I went on to write 3 more books about my walking long-distance trails. Next year, I hope to update my book on the Ridgeway in the same way that I updated my South Downs Way this year and share the 2 stories in it, because I really think that kind of adds to the richness. The same person walking the same trail book 2 times, and it can be just a world of difference. So, what are you going to learn today? How to tell if your story is worth sharing, how to get started sharing your story, how to decide on the format of your story, how to get clear on the things that might get in the way of putting it out there, and finally, how to get the mindset you need to tell your story. So, first of all, how to tell if your story is worth sharing. Now, I said, yes, it absolutely is, but I think the most important question to ask yourself is, are you excited about it? Are you excited about sharing your story in a book or some other format? Are you excited about whatever the topic is that you've chosen? Whether it's, so let's use my books as an example, whether it's writing books about business mindset or writing books about walking or writing books about trees. Are you excited? Are you willing to invest the time, the effort, and the money needed to tell your story and get it out there to the world? Finally, are you happy to put in that time, effort, and money even if no one reads it? And I asked this question because I was talking with a friend of mine a couple months ago about book writing, and she had mentioned something about how, maybe she might be interested in writing a book, but what's the point in writing a book if no one reads it? And my first reaction was, obviously I want people to read my books because I do. Because I write them not only to just tell my story and for the creative process, but also to help people, to help encourage people to get outdoors and to walk and to spend time with the trees. But even if no one read my books, I would still write them because creative expression is such an important part of my life, and it's such a deep need that I have, and it's so deeply satisfying and nourishing at like a soul level. Like, I love writing my books. I really miss, now that we've been in lockdown for a couple of months, I miss being able to do my workations where I go and I just hyper focus on a book for 2 days. Like, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Like, I love it so much. And I have been writing, but it's not quite the same. But I still love it. I love writing. So I would be very happy to put in the time, the effort, and the money, even if no one read it. But what about you? Because it does take a lot of time to write a book. You might write a short book, and that will take less time, but it takes time. And it takes the effort of sitting down at your desk or somewhere else and writing the book. And it requires some investment. You're going to need to hire someone to do the cover. You're going to need to hire someone to typeset the book, to format the ebook. You might learn how to do those things yourself, but you're probably going to have to invest in software to do it. So, are you happy to put in time, effort, and money, even if no one reads it? Next, how to get started on sharing your story. First of all, get clear on your why. What's the purpose of telling your story? So with my mindset books, which I've released the second editions of 2 of them this year so far, and I'm going to be releasing the further 2 later on this year. So my purpose at the time that I wrote them was because that was the work I was doing, business mindset. And I knew I could only reach so many people by doing one-to-one work because my one-to-one sessions weren't cheap. So I wanted to help a bigger audience in a bigger way at a smaller investment. So some people could read those books, go away, and either train in a technique with themselves or work with someone else or find some way of doing the actual mindset work. So my books kind of helped you figure out the stuff that you needed to work on. Or in some cases, it did drive traffic to my business. It did get me clients. But that was kind of a secondary why. My main why was to just help more people in a bigger way with their mindset, their business mindset specifically. So that was why I released the first editions. The second editions, I really thought hard about that because what was the point of updating them if I wasn't doing that work anymore? But I decided to do that because I thought that I had learned a lot about my business, a business mindset since I had written them. And there were things I could add, and there were things that I think people needed. And the first editions had just been ebooks, and I really wanted to release print and audio and also workbooks. So I wanted to get the book out there in more formats to appeal to more readers because I think they were really helpful. I've had really good feedback about those books over the years. So with my walking books, as I've said, I really want to help people get out there and connect with nature in different ways, but with the walking book specifically through long distance walking. So I've had several emails from people over the years saying, I never thought I could do a long distance trail, but I read your book and I thought I'd give it a try, and I did, and it was great. And I think the fact that I was very kind of honest and unfiltered in sharing my story and explaining just how difficult it was, but I still did it and I still enjoyed it, I think that encouraged people to give it a try because they saw that yeah, it's not a walk in the park, but maybe I can do it. So my intention was to try to get people outdoors doing something that perhaps they think or thought they might not be able to do. With my tree book, well, the trees asked me to write that book, but also the intention was to encourage people to get out into nature, to connect with nature in different ways, and enjoy the trees. So that's my why. So what's your why? What would be the purpose of telling your story? Whether it's writing about your own long distance walking experience or creating a collection of stories about the way you interact with nature or something else. Maybe you want to write about something business related. Maybe you want to write about personal development, whatever. What's your why? Why do you want to tell that story? Next, you need to map out an outline and make it as detailed as you want. But at the very least, you need to map out the chapters. And that's pretty much just what I do. I create a map or an outline with each chapter title. And then I set that up in some software called Scrivener. And you don't have to use Scrivener, but I find it really, really easy to work with. Because I can drag and drop the chapters. Because often once I start writing a book, I realize that different chapters need to go in different order. And I add chapters, delete chapters. So the outline may change, and it probably will change. So it needs to be flexible. And it helps if you use a software that allows you to be flexible. Now, if you're writing a book about your walking trail, the chapters are probably going to be day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. But there's more to that in my walking books. I mean, I also talk about like what to pack and where to stay and other practical information. So it's really useful to have an outline because also it breaks the big goal down into smaller chunks, which makes it much easier to complete the project, I think. I mean, if you can write a blog post, you can write a book chapter, and then you just need to write the next chapter and the next chapter and the next chapter. It's really not hard. Assuming you're super excited about your topic, you know why you're doing it, and you're really willing to invest the time and effort and money into this project. So, even with my short reads books, of which I've only released one at the moment, my Into the Woods short reads, even those have an outline. They have a format. So the short reads books are designed to be read in about a half an hour, but it starts out with a chapter that says about the Into the Woods short reads, like what's the purpose of it? What are the sections? Then I go into what you're going to learn, and it's just 5 bullet points about what you're going to learn. Then I go into the main content. Then I have 3 actions you can take related to the content. Then I have a chapter with links to stuff that I mentioned. And then finally, I have a list of related podcast episodes. So those books were created to drive traffic to my podcast, to try to get new readers to the podcast, to provide bite-sized books, short, actionable content that can get people taking action on something to make their lives better. But as you've seen, even that has an outline. So no matter how long or how short you decide to write your book, or however else you're going to tell your story, break it down into an outline of bite-sized chunks. Now, the most important thing is, and I'm assuming you're going to self-publish or independently publish this rather than traditionally publish, the best part of that is that it doesn't matter how long your book is. It can be 10,000 words. It can be 20,000 words. It can be 80,000. It can be 100,000. It can be however long or however short you want, because you don't have to follow someone else's guidelines. So make the book as long as it needs to be to tell your story. Next, how to decide on the format of your story. So I'm assuming you're going to be writing a book, because that's what people keep writing to me about. But a book has different formats. You can write an ebook, you can write a paperback, you can write an audiobook, you can write a workbook. Personally, I think your book absolutely needs to be available in both ebook and paperback, because while ebooks are really popular these days, a lot of people prefer paperbacks. So if you only produce your book in one format, you're not going to make that book available to people who prefer the other format. Audiobooks are one of the fastest growing areas of publishing now, if not the fastest area. A lot of people don't read books with their eyes anymore. They listen to their books. Podcasts are becoming more and more listened to. So again, that requires a bit more of an investment to create an audiobook, but if you don't, you're missing a huge audience. And finally, workbooks. So with my mindset books, I've been doing workbooks for them all because it gives people a space to write out their answers to all of the questions that I include in the main book. With my walking books, it wouldn't make sense to do a workbook. With my tree book, it did make sense to do a workbook. So workbook is a great extra income stream, but it may or may not be relevant to your book. So again, I'm assuming you want to write a book, but maybe you want to do a podcast where you tell your story in like a series of podcast episodes. Or maybe you want to start a YouTube channel and do videos talking about sharing your story. Whatever's right for you. Again, I'm kind of focused on books because that's what my great love is, and that's what people seem to be writing to me about lately. Next, it's really important to get clear on the things that might get in the way of you not only completing the project, but putting it out there. So maybe you think you don't have enough time to write a book. Look at your calendar. Figure out where you can spend some time writing the book. Figure out what things you can delete from your calendar so that you have more time. Maybe you need to stop listening to podcasts for a while. Maybe you need to stop watching television for a while. I don't know. Look at where you've got time that you're spending on other things that you can delete for a while. Not saying you have to quit watching television forever, but maybe for the duration of this project. Find the time. If this is that important to you, you will find the time. and make it a priority if it is indeed a priority for you. Next, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth. Am I good enough? Will people want to read it? That's a big thing, I think, for a lot of people, especially who are telling their own personal story. I just felt really vulnerable. Not so much when I wrote the business mindset books, but when I wrote my first walking book, and all my walking books. So my first walking book, again, it was very difficult for me. It was harder than I expected it to be. I had a rough time, and I felt very vulnerable about putting that out there because so many of the walking books or hiking books that I read, it's all these people that are like, oh, I didn't train, I didn't have any experience, I just bought a backpack and packed it, and then I walked the Pacific Crest Trail, and then I walked the Camino de Santiago. Like, it's a bit daunting because I walked this tiny little 100-mile trail and I had a rough time. So I felt really insecure about that. And I have a couple of 1-star reviews for that book of people who were like, this person is too negative, this is a great trail, this person was whining all the time, like, that didn't help. So, handle the self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth issues, and don't read your reviews. Have a trusted friend or family member look at them for you. Learning blocks. A lot of people have blocks around learning, like, I don't know how to write a book and I can't learn how to, or I can't learn the technology, or I can't learn the publishing stuff. That's something, like, if you feel like you have that kind of block, that's something that you need to be aware of. The sooner, the better. Fear of bad reviews. What will people think of me? Bad reviews are, you're going to get them. Everyone gets them. Like, every time I feel bad, I don't look at my reviews, but sometimes when I'm like looking at my book page because I'm thinking, oh, I need to update the description or something, I'll accidentally see a bad review and I'm like, it still affects me. Like, it's like a punch in the gut. But, every time that happens, I'll go to a book that I've loved and I'll read the 1-star reviews for that book and I'll think, oh, I feel so much better. Everyone gets 1-star reviews. Some people are just hateful, miserable people and want to trash all the things that they read. A lot of the 1-star reviews are quite honestly, not just for my book, but for like people in general, just bitter and angry and just nonsensical. Like, the things that people give 1-star reviews for, it's ridiculous. So don't be afraid of bad reviews. Don't look at them. Again, I usually have my husband look at them and I say, is there anything I need to be aware of? Is there anything that people are constantly complaining about? Like, if there are common threads, you need to pay attention to that and maybe update your book. But a lot of times the 1-star reviews are just ridiculous. Finally, fear of being visible, fear of putting when you put your book on Amazon, Amazon is the second biggest search engine, or third. Second after Google, I think. But I don't know if that statistic includes YouTube. But, same company. So Amazon is one of the biggest search engines. So people are going to find your book that have never heard of you. People that aren't your friends, that aren't your family, that don't know who you are, they don't care, but they might be interested in your book and they buy it and they read it and they review it. And that's scary, especially if you're writing a personal story and you're being vulnerable in the story. Like, that can be really scary. So if you are aware that you have a fear of being visible, be aware of that. Like, dig all this stuff up, write down all of your fears. This is really, really useful. Like, I talk about this all the time, but don't sweep them under the rug. Get them out into the open where you can shine the light on them and like look at them and see them, so that you can do the mindset work to get the mindset you need to tell your story and put it out there. So how do you get the mindset you need? Start by getting the clarity on what might trip you up. I've just talked about that. Next, you need to get clear on what you do need to believe about yourself in order to achieve your goal. So, if you believe you don't have enough time, stuff like, I have all the time I need and more to write my book. I make my book a priority. If you have self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth issues, you might say something like, I am good enough and smart enough to tell my story. I'm good enough and smart enough to write a book. My story is worthy of sharing. Learning blocks. I'm a great learner. I am great with technology. It's easy for me to learn new technology. If you have fear of bad reviews, what will people think of you? You might need to believe something like, no matter what people think of me, my story is worth telling. It's safe to receive bad reviews. I don't know, something like that. If you have a fear of being visible, it's safe and appropriate to be visible. It's exciting to be visible. So get clear on what you need to believe about yourself in order to achieve your goal. And finally, do the mindset work to get those beliefs. So I'm a big fan of Psyche. I would say train in it yourself so that you can do the technique. It is an investment. Not everyone has the money. Tapping is really good. If you go online and search for tapping videos, you can find tapping videos for all kinds of things. Also, you can see a practitioner for that. But if you want to do it for free, go online, get a free tapping video on, self-worth, self-esteem, learning blocks, visibility, whatever, and get that done. Do the work yourself or hire someone to help you. Depending on your budget, tapping videos might be all you can do, and that's fine. Anything that you can do to clear those limiting beliefs and implant the enhancing beliefs, the positive beliefs, is fantastic. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I hope you found this interesting and useful. If you have any questions, thoughts, whatever, please email me at holly@hollyworton.com. If you have an idea for a book or an idea for a story that you want to tell, please email me. I would love to hear from you. I get really excited about people who want to write their own book. Yeah, I would love to cheer you on. So that's all for this week. Next week, I am super excited. I have a podcast episode with my friend Adam Wells. We talk about, once again, walking a long distance trail. And I really loved having Adam on the show. I've wanted to get him on the show for a while and just now got around to doing it. We recorded the episode yesterday. It was really good. Adam runs a walking group here in London and Surrey, and he has all these really great nuggets about walking philosophy. I don't know. He has a really good way of putting into words things that I've experienced and things that I've felt, but I've never really known how to explain. And we talk about that in the episode. It's such a good episode, and I'm really, really excited to bring this conversation to you. So tune in next week to hear some more about long distance trails. And that's all. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast apps you use. If you haven't yet left a review, I would love it if you did. That will help more people find out about this podcast. That's all for now. Remember to visit hollyworton.com/358 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.